Hello. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of economics and money. This is important to an engineer because money and economics are the number one constraint of what we are able to do. Remember, there's infinite solutions to a problem. That is, if there are no constraints. However, once you put constraints, you start limiting solutions. So the good engineer knows how to come up with solutions within the constraints available. For example, if I say I need a new bridge from here to Canada, I can come up with infinite number of designs for this new bridge. But if I don't have the money to build it, it'll never get built. So understanding finances and constraints is important. So to illustrate the point, I'm going to use these two bowls here of change. There's basically two key economic tools. One is called monetary policy, the other is fiscal policy. And it's important to know the difference, and it's important to know that you can't have one without the other. They're both of equal importance, and so understanding what they do will help guide you along the way as you do projects and you work with budgets. So, what are the two different policies? Well, monetary policy has to do with the amount of money. So I've got these two bowls full of change here. I've got this brown bowl and this white bowl. So what monetary policy does is it adjusts the amount of money that's available. So a tight monetary policy would be like taking this bowl away. So there's my amount of money I have. So, for example, when you hear about supply-side economics, well, supply-side economics has a concept of if we cut taxes, then we can boost the amount of money available. And it's logical. I cut taxes, there's more money available to spend. And that works under the assumption that it's a mercantilist assumption, that there's only a set amount of money available. So the more that the government takes, less you have, and vice versa. Now, it has been disproven over the years that the mercantilist view that there's just a finite supply of money is incorrect. But that's what it's based on. It was the same view that they had during the conquest of the New World about the supply of gold. There's only a finite supply of gold. It's something that's tangible, and so if I'm the Spanish and I have all the gold, then I have all the wealth. And so the other countries, the other European powers, the Spanish would get the gold and they would pirate the ships to steal the gold because there was only a finite amount of money, or so they thought. And so this created a lot of issues, this limited view of the supply of money. However, we know that money is not necessarily finite. For example, there's credit cards. And so you may have a finite supply of money as a person because that's your paycheck. So let's say you only get $200 a week. That's your paycheck. That's it. That's all you get. And you look at it, you go, well, all I can spend is $200 a week, except if I have credit cards. And now suddenly the supply of money has gone up. Granted, it's money on paper only, because eventually it has to be paid back. There's a debt. And that's the whole idea of debt. There is a debt, and eventually that debt has to be paid back. But you've just expanded the supply of money. And that becomes a valuable tool, especially to government entities or developers, this idea of debt, of expansion of money, because that allows us to get things done. For example, when you're a civil engineer, infrastructure is very expensive, and the limited amount of resources that governments have to build things, it would be impossible to build anything. There's just not enough money. So they issue what's called bonds. And what are bonds? Bonds are a credit card. It's an extension of debt for, so let's say your local government has just this pool of money. So they'll get bonds, and now they suddenly have that pool of money. And so now we suddenly have more money available to build things and do things. So it becomes very important to understand those concepts. So, you could say, okay, this brown dish is what we would get in taxes. That's our tax revenue every year, is that. And it's kind of limited, and it's going to restrict what you can and cannot do. And the problem with tax revenue is some years it's big, and some years it's small. So it becomes really, really hard to build anything large because you never know from year to year how much money you're going to have to spend. So some years you may have just that, some years you may have that, and some years you may have that. So it fluctuates from year to year. And then that becomes a challenge in and of itself, is this fluctuation. So what governments will do is they'll get something called a bond. And a bond is a set amount of money, and it's basically a loan. And so it's a loan from bondholders to the government, and then the government says, okay, we'll pay you back. And so that's the whole idea. If you ever hear about bonds, that's the whole idea. You're basically loaning the government money, and the government is paying you back. So that's what bonds are. Very simple. It's like a giant credit card for the government. So monetary policy deals with the contraction and expansion of the money supply. And again, if you take the view that there's a finite amount of money, that's where supply side comes in, that the more the government takes, the less you have, and so the more you have, the less government has, and that it's a zero net sum. And we know that's not true. We know that the money supply expands and contracts. So now we start getting into fiscal policy. And fiscal policy tells you what you can spend certain pools of money on. So example, I had my one bowl, and then I expanded that, and now I got two. So I go, look at this. I got twice as much money to spend. Now I can do really cool stuff. Well, not so fast. We have to understand the fiscal policy of it, because fiscal policy tells me what I can spend the money on. And so a lot of tax bills, for example, when we vote on them, will say this money is to be used only for this purpose. Well, that becomes a real issue, because let's say that I have a lot of money, like right now, I got all this money, and I want to build something. And let's say they say, oh, well, you can't use that pot of money. You can only use the other pot of money. Well, suddenly, I cannot use my money to its best and fullest use because I'm restricted in what I can use them for. So this nice, large infrastructure project I had, now I cannot afford because I don't have the full pot of money available. And it was a quirk of Oklahoma law, for example, that bond money could never be used for operations. So I could build something. I could build a building. I could, buy things. But I wasn't able to maintain them. And so that's kind of important. It'd be like buying a car. I'm using, let's say Aunt Ida gave me this pool of money. And Aunt Ida says, okay, you can only use that to buy a car. Okay, so I go out and I buy this car. Well, this is what I have left. Well, if that's not enough to cover, let's say, insurance and gas and maintenance, then now I've got this car that I can't use. It becomes absolutely pointless because I don't have enough money to cover it. So fiscal policy becomes important. And I'm going to use these two bowls as a perfect example. So I got two different pools of money, but I cannot use them both together. And in this particular case, what my brown bowl is, this is Canadian money. Remember, I live I'm up here on a border crossing, so we get a lot of Canadian money. So that's Canadian money, and that's American money. So let's say I want to go buy something across the border in Canada. Well, pretty much, you take that out of the equation. That's what I have. Because the other money is American money and I can't use it in Canada. Same thing vice versa. Let's say I want to buy something here. Now I just have that pot. And that's fiscal policy. That's dictating to me what I can spend my money on. So they go hand in hand. So I can expand the pool of money, but I have to be careful in how I assign what that money is to be spent on. Because when I restrict it down, I got all this money, but do I? My monetary policy, I've expanded the money supply, but if I'm restricting it with fiscal policy on what I can and cannot spend that money on, then have I really expanded it? Then I'm putting more constraints on there. And that is a very brief overview of spending policies, which again, especially engineers that are involved, anything with infrastructure like civils, or for example, in the defense industry, because that goes right with government spending and fiscal and monetary policies, we get directly impacted by this.